Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator. I want to actually start by thanking you and FEMA for the extraordinary efforts that you made in New Jersey, which I know are representative of what you did elsewhere in the country to support our vaccination efforts. We had one site in Newark, New Jersey, a FEMA-run site where more than 220,000 people were vaccinated. And it's one reason why we are doing very, very well as a state in beating back this terrible disease. For my questions, I want to turn to the climate risks that you mentioned several times, including in your testimony. And I appreciate that in your testimony, you noted in that context that FEMA will, as you said, always be ready to respond when disaster occurs, but the true success rests in mitigating the worst impacts of disasters before they occur. And so in that spirit, I want to ask you, I want to talk about one word, and that word is resilience. We have in the bipartisan infrastructure deal $40 billion in this category of resiliency. And don't get me wrong, I support it. This is money we have to spend. I support what FEMA does on resiliency. But I'm concerned that sometimes some of my colleagues treat that resiliency money as if that is our response to climate change, as if that is somehow green. And I would note one story that I'm sure you recently saw. The city of Miami asked the Army Corps recently, what are we going to do about rising sea levels? How are we going to protect ourselves? And the Army Corps came back and said, well, here's what you do. You build a 6-mile long, 20-foot high seawall. It's going to cost you $6 billion. Obviously, no one in Miami was happy to hear that news. And I've seen estimates from organizations like the Center for Climate Integrity that to protect every community in the United States just by building seawalls against the climate change that is already happening would cost around $400 billion for storm protection. And the Army Corps doesn't have that kind of money, even with what we're about to appropriate. So obviously we're going to see cities that are wealthier protecting themselves, communities that are less wealthy, unable to do anything. And so I want to ask just your thoughts on this. I presume, obviously, FEMA will do what's necessary to protect our communities with the budget that you have. I presume you agree that it would be better if we made these investments to prevent the catastrophic effects of climate change rather than simply investing in resilience.
Yes, sir. We are really at a pivotal time, right? We're seeing more impacts from disasters, more frequent disasters, and we have an opportunity to really make a generational level difference in the investments that we make to protect not only our children, but our grandchildren from the impacts from these future threats. FEMA has a small role in that. We do have several mitigation grant funds available, but they don't come to the level of the types of projects that you're talking about. But what we do have is within the programs, and in particularly the BRIC program, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, we've increased the amount of the federal share so we can start to do more community-wide and system-wide projects within the communities. And we also, as part of that process, really encourage them to partner with other types of mitigation efforts that are ongoing to reduce the impact. And so I think it's through this type of a partnership across many different agencies, whether it's federal agencies, private sector, and the communities themselves, that we really work together to better understand what they think their future risks are going to be. And we do some long-term visionary planning for how we can reduce the impacts from those risks.
I think it would be helpful just going forward, the more you can help us estimate the long-term costs, because obviously your budget is not nearly what it needs to be. Again, just dealing with the level of climate change we currently are experiencing. Army Corps' budget is not nearly what it would need to be. I mean, honestly, if we did nothing to prevent the effects of climate change, within 10 or 20 years, like the entire federal budget will be resiliency. And I want to make the point that while I am for doing what is necessary, resiliency is not climate policy. Resiliency is resignation. And this is why we got to do some of the bold and ambitious, yes, costly things that President Biden has proposed will be much cheaper than the alternative. Thank you, and I yield back.